Imagine an entire continent just, well, wiped clean of a species, right? Save for like one tiny, desperate valley in France.
Yeah, that's an incredible image.
Right. Because we usually think of extinction as this really slow, peaceful fade to black, like like a candle burning down until it just goes out.
Exactly. That's the classic narrative.
But, if you look closely at the final millennia of the Neanderthals, it wasn't a peaceful fade at all. It was a violent near miss, and then a miraculous recovery, and finally a hidden genetic curse.
It really plays out like a thriller.
It does. So if you're ready, let's dive into the source material today. For this deep dive, we're looking at a major new study published in the journal PNAS, and this was by an international team led by Cosimo Posth and Charoula Fotiadou, along with some incredibly revealing scientific commentary.
And it's a massive piece of research.
Yeah, and I promise you, the story you think you know about how Neanderthals disappeared is, well, it's about to get completely flipped on its head.
It really is a chaotic landscape once you start looking at the ancient DNA.
Yeah.
I mean, what this team did is nothing short of a massive data merger.
Right.
They managed to sequence 10 entirely new Neanderthal mitochondrial DNA genomes, which, getting viable DNA out of bones that are tens of thousands of years old.
Oh, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, it's a monumental task on its own. But then they took those fresh genetic sequences and laid them over this massive, large-scale archaeological database called ROAD.
Which tracks exactly where and when these Neanderthals were actually living, right? Based on the physical camps and the artifacts they left behind.
Exactly. It maps out their physical footprint.
So we have this cinematic, almost unbelievable story of the late Neanderthals. Because what this combined data shows is that they didn't just slowly vanish as modern humans moved in.
Right. They actually survived a catastrophic near-extinction event.
Yeah, they rebounded across an entire continent and then ultimately faced a final fatal collapse.
To understand that dramatic end, we really have to look at the world they lost first.
Okay, let's wind the clock back.
Yeah, so if you were to look at a map of Europe between, say, 130,000 and 80,000 years ago, Neanderthals were doing incredibly well.
Like a massive footprint.
Huge. They were highly adaptable, genetically diverse, and spread all the way from the Iberian Peninsula in modern-day Spain straight across Western Eurasia to the Black Sea.
And the sources mention some specific individuals from this older, prosperous period, right? There's a Neanderthal found at Pichurina Cave in Serbia, dated to around 111,000 years ago.
Yes, that's a great example.
And the key takeaway from the DNA of individuals from this era is that they had these really deep, branching family trees.
Exactly. You had multiple distinct genetic lineages all existing at the exact same time.
So they were a varied, robust population.
They were. But, geology doesn't care how well a species is doing.
No, it really doesn't.
Catastrophe strikes. Around 73,000 years ago, the climate just falls off a cliff. We enter a period that geologists refer to as the MIS4 glacial stage.
Okay, let's unpack this, because MIS4 sounds like, I don't know, a filing cabinet drawer. But this isn't just a bad winter.
No, not at all.
What does MIS4 actually mean for the Neanderthals who are living through it?
So, MI stands for marine isotope stage. Scientists look at oxygen isotopes trapped in deep-sea sediment cores to figure out global temperatures.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and stage 4 marks a period where massive amounts of the Earth's water got locked up in expanding polar ice caps.
Which means less water everywhere else.
Precisely. So for the Neanderthals, it meant their world became brutally cold and unbelievably dry. I mean, forests just died off, turning into frozen steppes.
And the animals they hunted?
They migrated or they died. And this brutal period lasted from roughly 73,000 down to 60,000 years ago.
That is a long time to suffer. And this is where that ROAD database comes into play, right? ROAD stands for the Rossi Out of Africa Database, and it essentially lets researchers plot Neanderthal archaeological sites on a map in like 10,000-year slices.
Yes, it's an incredible visualization tool.
And when they looked at the slice for this MIS4 ice age, the map just, well, it just shrinks.
It completely collapses.
Yeah, by the 70,000 to 60,000 year window, the density of Neanderthal sites plummets everywhere. The only place you really see them concentrated is in a climate refugium in southwestern France, down in what is now the Dordogne region.
Exactly right.
So are we saying that out of this massive continent-wide game of musical chairs, when the Ice Age music stopped, the only chair left was in southern France and everyone else just died off?
That is essentially what the spatial statistics are telling us.
Wow.
And, the researchers rigorously tested this to make sure it wasn't just some kind of illusion.
Like maybe archaeologists is like digging in France better.
Right, you always have to ask that. Is it just that modern archaeologists prefer the sunny south of France rather than shivering in a cave in Germany?
I mean, I would.
Most of us would. But the statistical testing confirms it's a genuine, massive geographic contraction. The shrinking of their habitable niche really forced the survivors into this one milder region that still offered flowing river systems and enough game to hunt.
It's terrifying to think about. If you're a Neanderthal living anywhere else in Europe, your world simply freezes to death around you.
It's a grim reality.
But they didn't just stay huddled in that French refugium forever, because eventually the ice began to thaw.
It did. Around 65,000 years ago, the climate finally eased. The glaciers retreated, the steppes thawed, and that surviving Neanderthal population expanded back across Europe.
So they reclaimed their lost territories.
They did. But the DNA reveals they carried a hidden, devastating weakness with them.
Here's where it gets really interesting. When the researchers sequenced the DNA of these late Neanderthals who repopulated the continent, the conclusion was absolutely stark.
It's almost hard to believe when you look at the data.
Nearly every single late Neanderthal sequenced in Europe from Spain all the way back to the Caucasus belongs to a single maternal mitochondrial lineage.
Is one.
All that earlier genetic diversity from 100,000 years ago. The deep branching family trees, totally wiped out.
What's fascinating here is the sheer scale of the bottleneck. Now, just to be clear on the science, we are talking specifically about mitochondrial DNA or mtDNA.
Right, which is different from the nuclear DNA that makes up, like, most of our genome. Why do researchers focus so heavily on the mitochondria?
Because it's incredibly durable. Nuclear DNA degrades quite quickly, but a single cell can have thousands of copies of mitochondrial DNA.
Oh, so it's just a numbers game.
Exactly, making it much easier to find in ancient, highly degraded bones. Plus, mtDNA is inherited exclusively from the mother. It doesn't mix with the father's DNA at all.
So it acts like a single, unbroken thread tracing maternal ancestry back through time?
Yes. And what the researchers found when tracing those threads is a massive plateau of what they call genetic stasis.
Genetic stasis, meaning for tens of thousands of years, their DNA just wasn't changing.
Correct. For roughly 30,000 years during and after that glacial period, the surviving population was so small and so isolated that their mitochondrial lineages simply weren't branching.
So the gene pool was just totally stagnant.
Completely stagnant. No new lineages were surviving.
It's like repopulating all of North America using only the extended family from one small town in Texas.
That's a great way to put it.
Sure, give it enough time and they might spread out and fill the map from coast to coast, but genetically, maternally speaking, they're practically clones of each other.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. You have an entire continent populated by the genetic echoes of a single tiny survival group.
But wait, let me make sure I have this straight. If everyone in Europe comes from this one maternal line, what about the older lineages?
You mean the pre-bottleneck ones?
Yeah, did they all just die? Because the sources mention two rare exceptions that actually prove this rule.
Ah, yes. The study highlights two incredible individuals. One is nicknamed Thorin, found at Grup Mandrin, and another individual known as Lecote's Z4-1514.
And both of these skeletons were found in France, right?
Yes, in France. And when their DNA was sequenced, it didn't match the main homogeneous late Neanderthal branch that took over Europe.
Wow.
They actually had older, deeply divergent mitochondrial lineages.
So they're basically walking ghosts. They are the last living remnants of a diverse world that has already ended everywhere else.
Exactly. They were still sheltering in or near that original southwestern French refugium, even as the rest of Europe was being repopulated by the single dominant lineage.
So they represent the fading echoes of that older, pre-bottleneck world.
But everywhere else across the continent, the new, highly uniform population had taken over entirely.
So we have this massive, continent-wide genetic homogenization. And the study uses one specific location to really drive this point home, which brings us to Goyet Cave in Belgium.
Specifically, the Troisième Cavern at Goyet. And this site is doing a lot of heavy lifting in the data set. It is the most densely sampled Neanderthal site where multiple individuals have been found. And the team actually adding 3 new mtDNA sequences from Goyet just for this study.
And the detail that stood out to me here is so dark, but it paints such a vivid picture of how hard their lives were.
The cannibalism.
Yeah. The Neanderthal remains at Goya don't just represent family living peacefully in a cave. The zooarchaeological analysis showed that these bones reflect selective cannibalism.
It's brutal.
It wasn't ordinary occupation debris. It was a site where Neanderthals were actively targeted, butchered, and consumed by other Neanderthals.
A grim reality of survival in a harsh landscape. But scientifically, what makes Goyet so remarkable isn't just the cannibalism, it's the extreme time compression.
What do you mean by time compression?
Well, within a very narrow window of just 4,000 years, specifically between 45,000 and 41,000 years ago, the individuals found in this single cave in Belgium contain almost the entire range of mitochondrial diversity seen across all late Neanderthals in Europe.
Let that sink in for a second for you listening. If you look at a single cave over just a few thousand years, you capture the genetic breadth of an entire continent's population.
It's staggering.
That just proves how incredibly shallow their gene pool had become. I mean, if Europe was a swimming pool of genetics, it was about an inch deep.
Exactly.
But the researchers hit a massive scientific hurdle trying to prove this with the Goyet bones, didn't they? The dating was all wrong.
Yes, and this really highlights the incredible, almost forensic detective work involved in paleogenetics.
Okay, lay it on me.
When some of the Goyet specimens were originally radiocarbon dated, the results came back, showing they were from after 40,000 years ago.
Which shouldn't be possible.
Right.
Because 40,000 years ago is the widely accepted hard stop date for when Neanderthals went completely extinct in Europe. So the sources say the radiocarbon dates were ruined by museum varnish.
Sadly, yes.
Seriously, someone painted the bones.
Unfortunately, yes. In older museum collections from the 19th and early 20th centuries, it was common practice to apply varnishes, glues, or, animal-based preservatives to stabilize fragile bones.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and radiocarbon dating relies on measuring the decay of carbon-14 in the bone's collagen. But those old glues introduce fresh, modern carbon into the mix. It completely contaminates the sample, making the bones appear artificially much younger than they actually are.
Okay, I have to push back here.
Sure.
If the radiocarbon dating is totally compromised by a century of museum glue, how can we possibly trust the new timeline the researchers are presenting? Are they just guessing the dates based on the DNA?
It's definitely not a guess. They used a rigorously tested method called molecular dating, specifically something called Bayesian tip-to-root regression.
Okay, you're going to have to translate that for me.
Fair enough. Think of it like a molecular clock. Geneticists know that mitochondrial DNA accumulates substitutions, or random genetic mutations, at a relatively steady rate over long periods of time.
Okay, tracking the mutations.
Right. And because the researchers have highly accurate, uncontaminated radiocarbon dates from other Neanderthal bones across Europe to use as secure anchor points, they know exactly how fast that clock ticks.
Ah, I see. So instead of looking at the contaminated bone collagen, they look at the DNA sequence itself.
Yes.
They count the number of mutations in the Goyet DNA, compare it to the anchor points, and mathematically calculate exactly how much time must have passed for those specific mutations to occur.
Precisely. They completely bypass the contaminated bone and date the DNA itself.
That is genius.
It really is. And when they applied this molecular clock to the Goyet specimens, the dates snapped right back into place.
So they weren't too young after all.
Now, they matched the older 42,000 to 43,000-year-old time frame. It confirmed that these individuals lived right before the final collapse of the species, not after it.
Which brings us to the end of the line. The molecular clock ticks down to 0. The Neanderthals survived the MIS-4 ice age, they successfully repopulated Europe, but their incredibly low genetic diversity set the stage for a final, mysterious collapse.
Yes, and the researchers ran a highly complex statistical model called a coalescent Bayesian skyline analysis to visualize this final crash.
Okay, another big term. How exactly does a skyline analysis show us a population crash?
Think of mitochondrial DNA like a massive family tree. If a population is huge and thriving, that tree has millions of branches going in all directions.
Sure.
What this Bayesian skyline analysis does is use statistics to trace those branches backward in time based on genetic variation.
So you're following the branches down to the trunk.
Exactly. If you're tracing backward and suddenly see millions of branches violently converging into just one or two single twigs, you know you've hit a massive population bottleneck. The map calculates the effective population size and shows exactly when that tree got pruned.
And the results from this model are dramatic, right? The tree just gets chopped down.
It's a sheer drop.
They found a sharp, rapid decline in population size starting around 44,500 years ago. It plummets. They hit absolute rock bottom around 42,000 years ago. And by 40,000 years ago, the branches end. They are gone.
The study makes a crucial biological point here. A small, fragmented population with very low genetic diversity suffers from heavily reduced adaptive potential.
Because they don't have the variety to handle new threats.
Exactly. If a new disease sweeps through or the climate shifts rapidly, a diverse population has a better chance that someone has the genes to survive it.
Right.
But if everyone is genetically identical, a single threat can wipe out the entire group. They become highly vulnerable to inbreeding. And interestingly, the authors note that a completely separate morphological study looking at the physical shape of Neanderthal bones proves this.
Oh, I remember reading this in the sources. They looked at the semicircular canals in Neanderthal ears.
Yes, the inner ear bones.
And why the ears?
Well, changes in the shape of these canals are strong indicators of reduced genetic diversity and inbreeding. And that independent physical study identified the exact same bottleneck event the DNA study found.
Wow.
The genetic evidence and the physical evidence align perfectly to show a species running on genetic fumes.
It's the ultimate double whammy. They survived the Ice Age, but the cost of that survival strips them of their genetic armor.
Pyrrhic victory.
Yeah. But we have to talk about the elephant in the room here. The timing of this final crash, dropping off a cliff between 44,000 and 40,000 years ago, that is exactly when Homo sapiens, our own direct ancestors, were arriving in Europe.
It is the defining overlap. The arrival of modern humans happened concurrently with this final decline of the late Neanderthals.
So it's hard not to point fingers.
It is, but the researchers are very careful to point out the limits of their data. The DNA molecular clocks can only show us the timing of the crash. They cannot definitively adjudicate the cause.
Okay, so we don't have a smoking gun.
No, it can't tell us if it was shifting climates or competitive displacement by Homo sapiens moving into their hunting grounds or, a combination of both.
So what does this all mean? We have a genetically depleted, highly inbred population facing a wave of new, modern humans and shifting climates. But the study leaves us with one massive, glaring paradox that I honestly can't stop thinking about. It's the cultural evidence.
Ah, yes. The profound gap between their genetic patterning and their cultural pattern.
It's bizarre. It's like discovering a vast continent where everyone shares the exact same maternal grandmother. Their DNA is practically identical, but for some reason, they all speak completely different languages and invent completely different types of tools.
It's completely counterintuitive.
Yeah. The genetic data shows they were incredibly homogeneous, practically clones, but their archaeological tools, what archaeologists call the Mysterian toolkits, were wildly varied.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it leaves a massive puzzle for us to solve. To understand why it's a puzzle, you have to understand the tools. Mysterian toolkits weren't just simple rocks.
Right, they were engineered.
Highly engineered. They involved complex, multi-step manufacturing processes, like the Lavoie technique, where a core of flint is carefully shaped so that a single final strike produces a perfectly formed, razor-sharp flake.
Right. And the sources point out that late Neanderthals weren't just using one standard Lavoie technique everywhere. You had regional variations.
Exactly.
Different groups were making specialized scrapers, specific types of points, adapting their stone tools to fit the specific local environments and prey animals they were dealing with.
And this requires complex cultural transmission.
Because you have to teach the next generation how to make your specific valley's tools.
Precisely. Normally, if a biological population is tiny, homogeneous, and isolated, their culture stagnates.
Because there's no cross-pollination of ideas.
Right. But the late Neanderthals break that rule entirely. Why would their genes converge into one single depleted line? But their culture wildly diverged into all these vibrant regional technologies.
This raises an important question, then. It completely shatters the old, tired stereotype of Neanderthals as these static, unchanging, unthinking brutes who just got outsmarted by clever Homo sapiens.
They absolutely were not stagnating.
They were actively innovating, adapting, and passing down distinct regional cultures right while they were going extinct.
It's a testament to their cognitive flexibility. Genetic weakness does not equal cultural stagnation.
Clearly.
Even with an incredibly depleted gene pool, these late Neanderthals were culturally dynamic up to the very end. They were adjusting to local environments and social structures, even as their underlying biological resilience was fatally compromised.
It changes our fundamental understanding of who they were as a people.
It really does.
I want to bring this all together for you listening. Why should you care about a bunch of 60,000-year-old mitochondrial genomes and stone tools? Because this isn't just a dry story about a species going extinct in the distant past. It's a profound story about the hidden fragility of populations.
It's a stark reminder that survival isn't always a permanent victory. The Neanderthals were an incredibly resilient species. They survived a massive climate apocalypse during the MIS-4 glacial stage that would have wiped out lesser species.
Yeah, they rebuilt their world. They repopulated an entire continent from just a handful of survivors in a French valley.
But that survival cost them their genetic diversity.
They won the battle against the Ice Age, but the victory left them too genetically depleted to survive the second hit. Whether that hit was the arrival of modern humans, further climate chaos, or just the cruel math of inbreeding catching up with them.
The extinction wasn't a candle slowly burning out. It was a heroic recovery that simply lacked the biological fuel to last.
And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, something the data hints at but leaves wonderfully open. The researchers note that low genetic diversity leaves any population incredibly vulnerable to what they call stochastic local extinctions.
Which is just a fancy way of saying random bad luck events wiping out fragile, isolated groups.
Exactly. So imagine if that brutal Ice Age bottleneck 75,000 years ago had never happened.
A fascinating alternate history to consider.
Right. If the Neanderthals had not lost their deep original genetic diversity, if those deep branching family trees had survived, would that rich, varied population have possessed the biological resilience needed to survive the arrival of modern humans?
It's the ultimate what if.
Did the Ice Age essentially predetermine their extinction tens of thousands of years before Homo sapiens even set foot in Europe? We might never know for sure, but the DNA strongly suggests their fate was written in the ice long before the final curtain fell.
An incredible journey into our deep past and a powerful lesson on survival.
Thanks for taking the deep dive with us. We'll catch you next time.